Hey guys, welcome back to the next part of our series. Today we're going to continue with the sculpting of our character and we're going to start with the chest. So this is where we left off. We finished the merging of our base mesh while keeping the hands a separate piece because we're going to talk about those guys later. And yeah, we have this, which is looking quite nice. Now, this is not an anatomy class. We're not going to go like super in-depth about all of the different things, but there are a couple of like elements that I'm going to be mentioning, of course. The first of them is this colors that you see right here. These are called face sets. It's a new thing, or relatively new thing that we have here inside of Blender that allows us to create groups that work inside of the sculpting phase, inside of the sculpting mode, so that you can separate and isolate things in different ways. I'm not going to be using them, so one thing I'm going to be using right here is I'm going to go to remesh and I'm going to deselect face sets. So when I select or remesh, everything is just a single color. It just makes for easier sculpting right now. There's of course more complex elements where working with face sets is really like good, but in this case we're not going to use them. We're going to turn on symmetry with on the x-axis, of course. And yeah, let's start. First of all, let's start by smoothing things out. So I'm going to smooth the parts here on the chest. So on the chest, we have some very important landmarks that we need to have. I'm gonna grab my clay strips. Clay strips is one of my favorite brushes, especially like in ZBrush. It's a very like strong brush that you can use to push form in very quickly ways. So the first thing that we need to know is that there's this bone called the clavicle, which goes right here from the center of the body, and it goes outside towards our what's the word? Our deltoid right here. Okay, so we're gonna have this sort of like S shape. Kind of looks like the handles from a bicycle. That's what you want to get right there. And this guy, bones are super important in anatomy because bones are what tells us where things are and where things attach to. So by placing our bones in our characters, it's gonna be a lot easier to create all of the different things. There's of course one bone right here called the sternum. Goes all the way over here, and the big mass that we're already seeing here, those will be of course at the rib cage, which is the main structure that we have here on the upper side. Now we are going to be using the photos here from Disney Infinity as a reference, but we're not going to be following it perfectly because Deadpool in this case is wearing this sort of like bodysuit, and there's other things that need to be taken into account. Our character, he's going to be nude or naked on the upper side, or at least we're going to see a lot of the chest and of the back. So we need to take other things into consideration. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start placing one of the most important muscles on the chest, which is the pectoral muscle. And the pectoral muscle goes from the center of the body, that's the origin point, a little bit of the clavicles here, and it goes towards the arm. It actually crosses into the arm, and we create this very nice effect. So as you can see, using my clay strips, I'm connecting the elements here on the character so that we breach both parts. Now, I don't want to go like super intense on the form. Like I don't want to add a lot of form. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make my brush smaller, and I'm going to use Control to carve in a little bit of a groove that we would normally see right here. If you've seen like He-Man and all of those like comic book characters, that's kind of like what we're going for right here. Smooth that out a little bit. We're going to keep this very clean, very smooth, very stylized. We don't want to go for a realistic look, but there are, again, a couple of things that we need to take into account. So, for instance, one of the most important things that we need to take into account here with the chest is that the chest creates a shelf. You can see it right here. That like light and then dark parts here on the screen, that's what we want to create. So, one great brush to do that is the flatten, or even the flatten's going to work fine. I think the scrape peaks is also going to be good here. So as you can see right there, I'm using the brush to push in that sort of shelf. I'm going to exaggerate that one a little bit more. So I'm going to grab my clay strips, and with Control, I'm going to carve in a bit more of the detail right there. So carve this in, and there we go. So now you can see that we're going forward and then down. We can even use our knife, or like the sharp knife, to give it a little bit more of an intense effect right there. Let's soften this a little bit. Let's go back to our scrape and peaks. Just start flattening this area to clean up the chest section. There we go. Now we can keep going with the next part of our character. Again, as I mentioned, Deadpool right here has a suit, so we're not going to see all of the muscles. But since we don't have a suit, we are going to see some of the muscles. So I'm going to go back to my clay strips. I'm going to remove some of the volume here first, because right here we have something that's called the ribcage border. So I would expect to see a little bit of a volume here, like a roundish volume that goes and joins with the sternum on the top right there. So that's gonna be my ribcage border right there. Yeah, and if we go from the ribcage border down towards the hips, let's soften this up. Let's carve this in. We're gonna have the abdominal muscles, and that's the famous six-pack, right? So we're gonna have one guy right here, second guy right here, and then the third guy right here. That's actually a fourth one that you normally have here on the top, but these are the ones that are the most visible. And the navel, our little navel, is going to be right there, which right now we don't have enough geometry to get it, but it's going to be there. Other than that, there's another very important muscle, which is called the latissimus dorsi. It's a muscle that comes from the back of the character and goes towards the front. I'm just going to add the volume right here a little bit to fill in this gap that we have. And later on, when we talk about the back, I'll explain where that goes. But that guy is important because we are going to see it's actually going to be helping us create this sort of volume that we expect to see right here. Soften up that element right there. Remember, we want to keep things clean. In this area, again, I'm just going to like briefly mark it right now because we're going to sculpt it later on. But in this area, we're going to have a couple of other muscles. It's called the serratus muscle coming from underneath the trapezius. Sorry, not the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi. It's going to fill this area right here, but I don't want to do it just yet because we need more resolution. And I like to block in the whole character before we add all of the resolution. So right now it's just pectoral muscles, this ribcage sort of stuff. And we're going to do, oh, not that one, this one. This sort of like a ribcage shape. It's very important when you see it from the side, this thing kind of like rolls around. Should have this sort of like a round effect, you know, this sort of effect. And it doesn't matter if you need to like erase a couple of things. That's fine because again, we're going to be adding details later on. This is just the initial section of the sculpting process. Just fix the pectoral muscles a little bit. They should be like this thing right here. They're looking a little bit like wobbly there. So in this case, I'm just going to grab my elastic to form or to move or to grab, whichever one is closest. Just clean this up a little bit. It depends on, of course, how organic or how like dynamic you want this thing to be, or how like not dynamic. The proper word would be how stylized you want things. I do want it to be stylized, but not like super stylized. So I'm gonna keep some softer edges in certain areas, like the pecs right there are a good place. And there we go. That's that will be the, again, this will be like the latissimus dorsi. I would definitely need a little bit more resolution. I can definitely see that we're struggling a little bit with the resolution. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say 0.005. Remember, don't try to jump. Right now we're at 37,000. Don't try to jump into like super big numbers. One of the best rule of thumbs that I can give anyone who's starting sculpting is always work and get the most detail out of each of the steps that you're in. So for instance, here, let's carve in where we'll have like the handles of the clavicles right there. And now that you have a little bit more resolution, we can create a little bit of a softer look here on this guy right here. Smooth this out, and it's going to look a little bit more organic. Let's go back to the draw shape. As you can see, I go back and forth a lot. Like I smooth out and then just keep cleaning things quite a bit. And the reason I like to do that is that gives me a very organic look. There we go. Now that's where the latissimus dorsi ends. As you can see, it goes like towards the arm. And here's where I was mentioning that we can add the the serratus, which is like this little fingers. You've seen this guys in action figures and superheroes. This little like small little guys, they kind of go in the same direction as the rib cage. They get smoothed out, of course, with skin and fat on top of them. We're gonna see like usually 1, 2, and 3. Some people can show up to like 4. I've seen some extreme guys with 5, but you need to be really dehydrated. And then from here, we have another very important muscle, which is the one that we're missing right now and it's making our character look weird, which is the obliques, which are the muscles that sit on top of the rib cage, or not the rib cage, the pelvis. So I'm gonna grab again my clay strips right here, and I'm just gonna add some volume at this like side area. And this usually go towards the center like this. You've seen some of the, like if you've seen the Olympics, the swimmers, they usually have this really, really immense obliques, like super strong obliques. And you see like a pit right at the side of the obliques right here. So it kind of looks like a hollow section right here. Once we go into the leg, you'll see what we get there. Now, a question I get asked quite a bit, unfortunately, it's a weird question, but I get it asked quite a bit. Is what about the genitals, right? Like, should we sculpt like all of the reproductive organs right here? And the answer is, unless you're doing some sort of like anatomical like game or things where it needs to be super precise, don't do it. It's going to be more than distracting than accurate. People won't really say, oh, look at how accurate his character is. They're going to be like, oh, have you seen that part of the character? And it's not ideal. So the best advice I could give you in regards to this one is just sculpt the volume that you will normally get. Why? Because especially if you add pants and stuff like that, people sometimes forget about the volume that the external, in this case, male organs would create. And we're not gonna get exactly the volume. It will look really weird. It looks like something's missing. So just be careful there. In this case, again, just adding the general volume should be more than enough. And there we go. As you can see, the chest right now is looking quite nice. Now, here's another thing I want to talk about, because it's an additive process. We've talked about this, how everything we do in 3D starts with like pretty much nothing, and then it gets better and better and better and better. When sculpting, it's very important that you don't judge your sculpture based on everything else. You need to kind of like train your mind to only see what you're working on right now. So right now, I know that the arms, the shoulders, the head, everything is incomplete. So if I take it as a whole, it looks horrible, and I might be discouraged from going on because it looks horrible. But if I just like kind of like cover, imagine like hiding the arms and the head, and I just like focus on this area, that's going to make it a lot easier for me to understand where we're at and how our character is looking, okay? So don't judge everything just yet. We're going to keep on pushing. There's one more like a muscle that I want you guys to start blocking in. That's the deltoid muscle. We're going to find it right here. So again, using my clay strips, I'm going to add a little bit of volume here. A little bit of volume here. And it creates this sort of like triangular looking shape. Here's again where we're going to start like deviating a little bit from the Deadpool like element that we got. We only use that one for the main proportions, but we're going to be changing that a bit, and that's where I would expect to see the deltoid. Let's tweak the form a little bit, and there we go. It's this sort of like a round effect. I like to sharpen that one a little bit, so I'm going to use again our Scrape Peaks brush, just like flatten it up here, and then here on the side. And then here on the back, you're gonna see this sort of like 1, 2, 3 effect that we're getting there on the shoulder. Shoulder is one of my favorite muscles. It's very fun to sculpt in, and we can get some very, very cool results. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. As you can see, we're in a good position here with the chest. In the next one, we're gonna talk about the back. We're also gonna do a little bit about the neck because it connects everything, and we're gonna keep moving. Make sure to practice. Make sure to check reference. Make sure to look for images and things that might help you understand the forms of the elements better. Sculpting a character is definitely one of those complex things. That's why we practice with little skull first. But I know that jumping straight into a character might be a little bit challenging at first. Again, just take your time, practice a couple of times before you jump into this guy, and I can assure you that you're going to create something very, very cool. So yeah, that's it for this one, guys. I'll see you back on the next one. Bye-bye.